Welcome to this week's Real Estate Q&A. Historically, home prices are predicated on supply and demand. This is why many say home prices won't drop, hanging on to the narrative that inventory will remain low over time, causing home prices to continue to rise. These housing market bulls support their theories, stating that home prices are continuing to rise despite the higher mortgage interest rates. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the bears in the housing market believe that regardless of historically low inventory and the slight rise in the current year-over-year price increases, the current debt crisis in our country will overpower any supply and demand theories supporting that buyers have officially tapped out. And I don't think that anyone, hopefully including you, can deny that we are now facing the worst housing affordability crisis since the Great Depression. So let's check out the stats. All right, welcome back. And if this is your first time watching, I'm Todd Sachs, a real estate broker in the state of Maryland, and this channel is dedicated to everything real estate. From mid-2020 through 22, we experienced the absolute hottest housing market ever recorded. It was a time of never seen before stimulus and the cheapest financing. And this was because of the pandemic. So for the first time, at least in my lifetime, everyone was freed from rush hour traffic and thinking that they would be working from home indefinitely. This all worked together perfectly. Think about it. Prior to the pandemic, 5 days a week. For many, you slept in your home for maybe 8 hours a day, worked in the office for 8 hours, spent an average of 3 hours a day driving, shopping, going out somewhere, and that left only about 5 hours a day actually in your home. And this time was filled with chores like cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids, and getting ready to go to work. And then suddenly everyone was stuck at home all day and all night. This caused everyone to look at their current home like they never had before. There were those projects that you always wanted to do but never had the time or the money to do. So with the cheap financing, so many took out home equity lines of credit to fix up their home. Or they decided to take their home's equity to buy that second home. Or they decided to move from their home altogether. And with cheap mortgages, free money from the government, and with more time on their hands, buyers and sellers entered the housing market all at the same time. So now we're faced with more debt than ever before. Since the government also went into debt by helping us to get into debt, everyone's in debt. More debt than we've ever been in before. And now the interest rates for Americans and the government for our debt is making it pretty much impossible for us to ever pay it off. So what's the answer? Higher home prices? I mean, come on. Doesn't that sound ridiculous? So before we answer some questions and comments from this past week on our YouTube channel, let me show you some of the charts that pretty much says it all. All right, so this first chart that we're looking at has everything to do with the year-over-year price movement. So what we're looking here in this graph, this up and down line, reflects year over year how much home prices have changed from the prior year. As we take a look at what happened in the great financial crisis in 2008, you can see year over year how much prices actually plunged. But take a look now at the data because prices are actually plunging almost in the same vertical pattern. And when we take a look at this next chart, this was actually from a video that I shot when I was visiting Puerto Rico, podcasting with different experts on macroeconomics. I had the opportunity to sit down with Mike Maloney in one of our Tuesday night lives. You can find that video if you'd like to watch it. Actually showed and presented this particular chart showing that through the history of time. Now, this chart's from Dr. Robert Shiller. He's the professor of economics at Yale University. He's a pretty smart guy, very respected in, analyzing things like the housing market. And he's referenced a lot. But anyway, in Dr. Schiller's chart here, going back to like the 1800s, so a pretty good test of time, the 100 line really represents the fair value of housing. And what we see in this chart is over time, depending on whether we were going through like the Great Depression, where homes became very affordable, prices dropped. And then when we watch this chart, somewhere around the 70s into the 80s, home prices really became overvalued. And now we've watched like two basic bubbles happen within a 20-year period. And that was leading up to the 2008 crisis, where you could see how overinflated the housing market was. And then the result of that was a housing market crash. And even still in like 2011 and 2012, if you're looking at Dr. Schiller's chart here, homes are still considered overvalued through the history of time. So what happened next? Well, we had a rebound, right? The rebound that really went much higher than the bubble of 2008. We're like a massive bubble, something we've never seen before happen in housing. And now you can start to see where that line is coming down. And the question is, so Mike Maloney believes that in order to get back to this chart, we're like 120 to 140% overvalued in the housing market. And he believes that it wouldn't be unrealistic to see a drop of 50% of the home prices to get back into line of where it kind of has hovered around historically, like I said, back to the 1800s. The next chart I want to show you is from the National Association of Realtors. And in this chart, it actually shows the Housing Affordability Index in the United States. Now, this chart only dates back to 2000, but you'll get the idea because it does cover the great financial crisis of '08. So in this chart, the 100 line represents that a median household income can afford the median home price. And there's two things that I want to really point out here. And this tells a huge story, guys. Right before the '08 crash, housing affordability was still above that 100 line. So despite the fact that we had, the Great Recession, the Great Financial Recession, when we looked at home prices, even at the peak in 2006, the average median household could still afford the average median home price. Then obviously, as we had the housing market crash, the affordability index became much greater because as home prices started to decline, people could afford the house even more. So you could see that like in 2012, 2013, we hit like some of the best affordability where you could buy a house and still have a lot of money left over. But then look what happened. We had a decent recovery from the GFC and home prices just started to rise. And then something happened in 2021. Like I said in the start of this video, we really experienced everyone entering the market at one time, stimulus like we've never seen before, cheap financing. And look what happened to that line, guys. For the first time in 23 years, the HAI across the country fell below the 100 line. That means that no longer can the median income buy a median priced home. This is why I believe the bulls of the housing market are completely out of touch with reality and that our average working class American simply can't afford home ownership or the once American dream. So when we're looking and analyzing this data, you have to ask yourself, what do you believe will happen to home prices regardless of home inventory? But now that we're speaking about inventory, let's take a look at this next chart. So in most recorded downturns, booms and busts seem to show up first in new construction. And a little secret here is, why does it show up in new construction first? Well, think about it. In most cases, unless the seller is distressed, they don't really need to move. It's not like the pandemic where we're sitting at home and everybody's looking at their house saying, I got to get out of here, or their small apartment closed in, on the four walls. So what happens is home builders, well, they have two decisions, right, that they have to make, because when they break ground on a community for a for sell community, not a for rent community, they really are building the houses for what? To sell. So they always must sell. So what we see here, unless they flip the communities to rentals, which really doesn't do the people that have already bought homes for home ownership, it doesn't do them any favors when that builder just kind of flips the switch and starts turning the community into rentals. So they always have to sell. This is where we see when buyers get tapped out, we start to see, them give incentives. And let's take a look at this inventory chart. So in this chart, new home inventory, guys, has shot up to 8.8 months of supply. Now, in our world of real estate, 6 months is really sort of like the guideline that we say. Less than 6 months typically is a seller in a traditional market, typically is a seller's market. More than 6 months typically is a buyer's market. We're sitting right now on 8.8 months of supply in the worst time of the year to have inventory, the slowest historical time of the year to have inventory. So this is higher, guys. This 8.8 months of supply is higher than pre-pandemic, when home prices were about 40% of where they are today. So what do we see as a result of higher inventory? Well, it's had a negative effect on new home prices, as incentives and price reductions in October are some of the greatest reductions that we've seen in the history of new home construction. So let's look at this chart that shows October's new home price plunge. Now, this chart is from David Rosenberg of Rosenberg Research, and actually I found it on Twitter, but very few other media outlets are even picking it up. The post that accompanied the chart says new single-family homes median sales prices plummeted in October to a negative 18% year over year, beating the plunge of the Great Recession's negative 15%. And actually, guys, looking at this chart, it actually beat the massive price correction in the 1970s recession as well. And in this recent article posted by investorplace.com, it's titled, Housing Market Crash Alert, We're in Severe Trouble. October home sales data is waving a red flag for the housing market. The global economy has weathered many storms, from financial crises to pandemics. However, one event looms ominously on the horizon: a potential recession triggered by a major credit event or a housing market crash, or possibly both. The warning signs are becoming increasingly apparent. The latest housing data suggests the market is not as robust as it might appear. Now for those comments and questions. So our first commenter is talking about a podcast that I posted on California being in trouble. And they said, exactly, nobody qualifies for a home unless making $300,000 and above, which 90% of Californians do not. So to reply to this commenter, let's take a look at this chart that shows us the home prices to the median household income in the US. And basically what this does is it says how many times, based on the price of the home, how many times your median income do you need to actually buy a home? And this is where the massive unaffordability issue is, because historically, you're somewhere around 4%, okay? In some markets, 3 to 4%, but mid fours on average if we look through the history of time. And by the way, and this chart dates back to 1953. So despite other recessions and booms, we are now in the highest recorded on this chart since 1953, even worse than the Great Financial Crisis. So during the Great Financial Crisis, right at the peak of the market, somewhere around 2006, you needed about 6.74 times your annual median income to be able to buy a home. So pretty crazy, right? We can look back at this chart and see that there have been times in history where, you needed a higher multiple to buy a home. But look here, we are now sitting at about 7.51%. So when we look at a lot of the housing markets throughout the US, we could see just how impractical it is to be able to afford to buy a home based on the amount of money that you make. And in Boston right now, I think it's been said that you need about 8 times your annual salary. So if you make $100,000 a year as a median income, you can find a house for about $800,000. So those numbers simply don't work. So our next commenter says, I wish mortgage rates would go to double digits to force these outrageous home prices down. I'm sick of people focusing on the rate. And this comes from our latest Tuesday night podcast where I talk about lenders saying, date the rate. You can always refinance later. And that may not be true. It may not be the case that you can always refinance because you have to get a home reappraised. You have to pay more fees to the lender. They want you to refinance again because they get paid again. But the truth of the matter is, depending on how long you're staying in the home, it just may not make sense for you to start your amortization schedule over again. And that brings me to a point that I always state that for me, it's more important on the price of the home, not the interest rate. Now, I know a lot of people have those golden handcuffs that have them, stuck in their house because they don't want to give up their below 4% mortgage rates. And, I get it. Right now, it wouldn't make sense because you'll pay more if you sell for less house. But what happens if you have to move? What happens if you want to take a job opportunity where you can make 30% more a year, but you're stuck with these golden handcuffs? You're going to take a loss when you sell is what's going to happen. You're going to take the job, probably sell the house. If it costs you money, who cares, right? But the point is that the cliche in real estate has always been buy low, sell high. Well, you're at what I think right now is the top of the market. And I believe based on these charts that we could possibly see some major home price corrections. So this commenter is right. If we jack those rates up to double digits, we will probably experience massive home price reductions. Our third commenter says first-time buyers are a lot more work than all cash buyers. I know where we're going with this one. The commenter says you can close in under 2 weeks, but a first-time buyer, you never know when or if you're going to close and get paid. This to me sounds like one of those cheerleading realtors that made this comment. So, here's the thing, comments like this, it's really disheartening to me that somebody would even say this. Like, why would, in the middle of a housing crisis and an affordability crisis, when so many people are on the sidelines, buyers have been kicked to the curb, why would you make a comment like this? I'm just kind of curious to even reference whether you're going to get paid. I mean, guys, look, if you're in this business, you have to have a heart for what you do. You have to advise, especially first-time buyers, what they should be doing, whether they should be even buying right now, how, whether they, what they're going to expect to pay, moving forward, owning a home, repairs, maintenance, if they're even ready for it. I mean, why would we even be talking about this? I don't know, but you guys can drop your comments below and let me know what you think about this comment. And this next commenter, I mean, this kind of pulls at my heart too, because we're coming into a time period where I believe that people are really tapped out on their credit, and we have the holiday seasons. And I think, unfortunately, what's happened is we've really missed the point of what the holiday seasons are really meant to be. And retail and big business has kind of pushed us into, we have to give and gift give and stuff like that and spend money. And a lot of people go into debt. I mean, it takes them sometimes even a year to pay off things like Christmas. But this next commenter says, I guess it's true that something is going on with credit card debt. For the second time in a row, visit to Costco. The person in front of me had their credit card declined. And they had to walk away with a cart full of stuff. I jokingly told the cashier, I must be bad luck because that was the second time in a row that happened. And he quietly said, no, it's happening a lot. Guys, I think it's fair to say we need to do a better job in educating people on finance, financial literacy. And I think at this point in time, we need to kind of put a lot of things aside and say, we're going to go through potentially a pretty rough time. And more important than the things in the cart become making sure that we're watching out for people that are going through a tough time. And then finally, guys, man, that last comment. That's the real shit, buddy. All right. And this last commenter is referencing the video that I did with Peter Schiff. And Peter Schiff actually was talking about how a house is really not an asset that appreciates, it actually depreciates. And a lot of people disagree with this, and you've heard me say it if you've watched my videos before. But the best way to really tell whether a house is depreciating, I'm talking about the structure, is if someone is when looking at a house that nobody has fixed up or spent any money on. You have to repair things, you have to fix the roof, you have to update because things go out of style. Things go through functional obsolescence, and unless you update these, your home actually depreciates. And for real estate investors, there's actually an IRS code that allows them to take this depreciation. So that's kind of like proof of how a structure will depreciate over time. So this commenter says, I saved $40,000 for a down payment on my first home. How do I still feel like I failed? Haha, would it still be a bad idea to buy a home? I thought that $40,000 down was equity. And what this person is saying here is that if you take your $40,000 down payment and you put it into a home, when you go to sell your home, you're hopefully going to get your $40,000 back, and you'll also come away with some more equity that you could either take or roll into your next home purchase. Well, this typically does happen, but it's not because of the structure itself. It's because the actual real estate, the land appreciates. So the land can also depreciate, based on what happens to the area. So areas of like, a lot of vacancies or higher crime rates or, employers that, go out of business and or leave the area. We know that from what happened in Detroit from the automakers. So prices can come down, and then certainly prices can come down when we have some type of bubble like we're in now and we see a correction. But the fact is that if you stay in that property long enough, history tells us you will gain price appreciation because it's always gone up with inflation through the test of time. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it today, you can smash that thumbs up and let me know that you did. And guys, don't keep this information all to yourself. Please share it with your family or friends. It's one of the biggest compliments that you can do for us here at Sachs Realty. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, subscribe now, smash that alert bell. You'll know when we upload content. And guys, keep those comments and questions coming. You never know, your comment or question might just be on next week's Real Estate Q&A. See you next time.
Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.